All right, our next guest here is Dhia Haddej, software product manager at Blancco. So welcome, Dhia.
Thank you, Andrew.
So this is a data center focused event. I'm familiar with Blancco from a data center standpoint, but for partners who aren't necessarily familiar with Blancco and what you offer, let's kind of start with a kind of a question for you. And what are the kind of questions that partners really should be asking their customers in a data center solution to introduce Blancco as part of that?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, definitely. So that's usually where everything begins. And a few questions I can think of is, for example, a general one about what does your chain of custody looks like when decommissioning assets, right? So we all know that assets get decommissioned at some point, but what's that process? So is it, drives moving around in a cart that needs to go somewhere for, sanitization? Are they worried about that chain of custody at all? Another maybe a variant of that question is, do you have a pile of drives sitting somewhere in a room in your data center, right? And that typically, and that's more common than you'd think, and that's usually akin to a problem that they know they have, but they're putting it aside, setting it aside.
So from a partner standpoint, usually the partner is brought in because, hey, we're getting something new. And so kind of you're saying, well, what the partner should be looking at is if they're getting something new, do they also have to get rid of something else?
Exactly. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Because usually a lot of times that's maybe like an afterthought. You're focused on the new stuff, where to put it, all that. But then what do you do exactly with the old stuff, right? So what's and we all know the old stuff has data on it because it was being used, right? So yeah, so that's how I would phrase it.
Well, I mean, that kind of seems like an easy lead-in to me from the standpoint of, what are we missing? What should we be doing around data center security? I mean, we hear a lot now about, all of these ransomware attacks and those kind of things. You just talked about, that data that's going to be valuable to somebody, even if it is aged.
Definitely, absolutely. And what's interesting is that we all know how data is growing exponentially, right? And then data centers are putting a lot of work and focus on backups, right? Everyone is afraid to lose their data, with not having backups or downtime. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind that all those copies of the data now have to be tracked and secured, right? And then there will be a time where that data will become obsolete, whether, like you mentioned earlier, whether you bring in new equipment and you need to get rid of the old stuff, or even, if you're repurposing a machine to do another project. So my take on that is to really think about including data erasure, data security in general, into the whole device life cycle. So be prepared from the start till the end. Not only think about it when a problem occurs.
So it sounds like a great opportunity for partners is to ask that question about, what are you doing with, are you pulling out old equipment for this? Are you going to repurpose old equipment? Because kind of what it sounds like is, even if you're going to repurpose in-house, depending on the kind of data that you're working with, you might want some kind of validation report that it was securely erased. Obviously, a lot of this, whether it's proprietary data or we're talking about compliance, that documentation that you're documented, is really critical.
Absolutely.
And it also sounds like it ties into, very much the whole supply chain from the standpoint of a product lifecycle. What are you doing with that old equipment? Do you see a lot of people looking at data erasure solutions, tying into like green initiatives because they want to pull out older, less efficient systems. They need to make sure that they're clean because they're going to be, repurposed or harvested for materials or whatever?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Andrew, because so maybe like let's say five or 10 years ago, this was not maybe on the radar of a lot of companies or infrastructures or data centers, and they had maybe a process where they will, for example, destroy drives or systems that are obsolete, or even keep them, like I said, in a room somewhere, forever. So spend money on storage rather than leaking them out or taking them out. But then recently, like in maybe the last few years, we've seen a lot of engagement that were motivated essentially by ESG, right, by environmental reasons, and like you have these big data centers that are realizing that they're leaving a high carbon footprint just because of them not taking an active solution for erasing data so that they can reuse the equipment later, because as we know, when you destroy a drive, there is no way to reuse it, right? And that leaves a footprint behind.
Thanks. Well, I mean, I know some of the other things that Blancco supports, and so going to give you the opportunity to talk about that a little while as well. Obviously, with everything that's gone on, we had a big shift. I think a lot of people got pulled off of their data center day jobs to set up end user machines for people who are going to be working from home. So now that we did what we had to do to get through that, and now we're looking at, in many cases, hybrid work models. We're going to continue to have people from working from home. Some of those people who may have been working from home for you are saying, well, if you're going to make me come back to the office, I'm getting something else. What are we doing? What do we need to do with those assets that are out in the field?
Correct. Yeah, that's a very, very good point and pertinent point to in these days that we're living in. And what I would say there is that there was a bit of panic where the IT didn't know what to do with those assets. And of course, the traditional way is just ask for them to be shipped back, and then they will be processed or sanitized. But then two questions come from that. Is that one, how do you guarantee that no data is leaked prior to shipping them, or the delay until you ship them? And also what happens if the device is lost midway, right? Which can happen. And this is where I would stress the ability to do remote erasure through Blancco. So what this means is that you can easily set it up in a way where you can have the Blancco erasure pre-installed or provisioned on these machines, right, prior to providing them to the user, or even at any point you can decide to add or update the machine to have this remote erasure capability. And what this gives you is that at any point, whether, like I said, the employee is leaving or they're changing machines or they need to upgrade something better, with the old machine, through a click or even through a script or automated policy, that machine will flip back into the Blancco software, and then start whatsoever. And then finish its job and send back an erasure report across the network, even using the home Wi-Fi of that user that was already set up on the machine. And this leaves you with a clean, closed loop and a clean audit trail that the asset is sanitized, that can be safely shipped back.
Oh, that sounds great. So that sounds like a solution to a lot of the immediate problems that a lot of organizations are facing. One of the things that I've talked about is that, a lot of the things that we did were stuff that we on the IT side have been saying, you should be doing this anyway. I kind of get the feeling that some of this falls in the same place. So what would be the next step beyond looking at, okay, well, I've got assets out in the field, how do I deal with them? If that's going to be my way forward, I've got a lot of field resources, maybe I've got some branch offices. What should I be considering as a kind of an end-to-end solution?
Yeah. So we just talked about the remote erasure capability, right? So that's definitely something I would stress, because that also cuts back on the touch points and the process. But another thing I would highlight is also the ability to do process control through intelligent business routing. So what this is basically a Blancco feature that allows you to visually create a workflow where you have different steps or process steps. So for example, when the machine boots, you do a discovery, and then based on the attributes such as the serial number, the model, if it's the laptop or the chassis, right, the laptop or server or what, then you take it to the next action, which is the erasure action, and that's also fully configurable through this visual, interface where you say, all right, so if it's a laptop, I want to do a NIST clear erasure. If it's a data center asset, I want to do a NIST purge, right? And then based on the erasure outcome, I will have either a shipping label, for example, printed if it's a home user, or have a, hey, there's a problem here. Now I need to get someone on the field and take care of further actions.
Well, that sounds great. Sounds like a good process to put in place. And, we've started talking off about the whole, compliance, and one of the things that you mentioned about, asset lost in transit. I have a feeling that most regulatory agencies would consider that a breach. And so, having a workflow that says, look, until we don't even print the shipping label until we've got the erasure report, is I can imagine being helpful in a case like that.
For sure, definitely.
All right, well, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we can draw up some interest in Blancco.
Definitely, likewise. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to you today, and I hope someone learned something from it.
Thanks again.